Hello again. This week's something a little different, another short video, but instead of showing how to do something, I'm going to show how you might tidy up code to make it more readable. This is actually more important than you might think, because it helps a lot with maintenance if your code is more readable and clean. And maintenance actually begins before you finish the code, because you'll typically write something, run through some tests and want to modify. As soon as you do that first modification, then you're in maintenance mode. So making things easier to maintain and read is going to be very helpful to you. I have the three pieces of code that I've used in the last videos: the auto stop loss, the trailing stop, and the high-low trailing stop. I'm using these because there is code that can be cleaned up, and the reason that I haven't cleaned it up as I was writing these initially, firstly, I was actually planning on this video, so I wanted to make sure there was something I could talk about. But secondly, I try not to introduce too many points into one video. Everything I've done in the earlier videos works. After you see this video, you'll be able to apply these concepts to future code as well. And if I build too much into one video, it can get confusing. So I try to write things as you would naturally write them, although in my own code, I apply different techniques, and I'm going to show you some of those today. I'm starting with the auto stop loss. For the auto stop loss, I've got a lot of code here in this onTick. Now the onInit, onDinit, onTick, and all of the other functions that can be added automatically by the wizard, these are event handlers. They are handling things that happen inside MetaTrader. My first principle is take the code out of the event handlers. So I try to keep my event handlers short, and they call a number of other functions, and each of those functions has a name that I can read it and understand what's happening inside this onTick section. So let me just make that change here. I'm going to call a single function that I'm going to call update stop loss. Now this is a very simple expert advisor, and I only have the one function, so this seems a little trivial. But in most expert advisors, I'll go through a number of steps, and generally in the same sequence. And by calling each of them as a function here, rather than put all of the code inside onTick, then I have something that's short, easily readable. I can see the steps that I'm going through, and they might be something like update values from indicators, close trades, open new trades, manage the open trades to adjust things like the trailing stops or take profits on them. And it's much easier to read that as a simple set of statements here in the onTick than to read through all of the code and maybe more and more blocks of code to find out what's happening. So that's a simple change to begin with. The other change that I mentioned in the trailing stops was that I will not rely on global variables. So input statements, the inputs, IMP stop loss points here, even the symbol and the time frame, I will put into these function calls if they're needed in the function, because that way these functions become globally useful, and I'll take them out and put them into a library of functions somewhere. And that way, if I change the name of this variable, this input stop loss points, if I change that in another program, then I can still call this function because it's not relying on that global variable. So I'll just make that change. So now I'm passing in the stop loss points, capturing it here as a variable, and using that here. The next thing is this constant. Now, in this case, I'm only using it in one place, but you may have the same constant in more than one place. They're also hard to see inside your code. I recommend not using embedded constants like this. In my case here, for this particular example, I'm going to turn that into an input variable, but you may simply want to declare it at the beginning of the code. So here it is as an input. If you wanted to simply have this declared as a variable and not have an input for it, then you just don't use the input statement. And that way, if I have used it in more than one place in my code, I can simply go here and make one change, and it's much easier to find these if they're all at the beginning of the code. And because it's now a global, I'll add that into the call to the function here. So now my code is still generally useful. I've got both the inputs coming in here, and I no longer have a constant here. So it's much easier, firstly, to read and understand what this is about, and secondly, much easier to change by just going to the constants at the beginning of the application. The next thing I want to do is reduce this nesting. You can see how this is getting nested deeper and deeper as I go through more conditions, and it can actually become hard to read. You can get many levels here. So I'll add a little bit of line spacing as well, just to separate sections of the code and what they're doing. So this is simply calculating a value that I'm going to be using later. This is initializing my loop. And now here, instead of saying if order select and then going into an if statement and nesting that one level, I'm going to reverse this, say if not order select, and then I'm just going to put continue. That continue statement will say that if this is true, and I've reversed the value here, so if I fail to order select with the not, then continue will simply come back and restart the loop, or go back to the next iteration of the loop, and we'll bypass all the rest of this code. So I'll put a line there so we can see the differentiation, which means that all of this code now comes out by one level, and that just takes a level of nesting away. And now I can do the same with this line. If the order magic number is equal to 0 and the order stop loss is equal to 0 and the type, so on. But this is a complex statement. There are two ways I can modify this. I'm going to do it the easy way. I just want to say if this is not true. So to do that, I'm just going to put all of this inside brackets. So I've opened up a new bracket for the if statement and then put a not in front of that, which means that I need another closing bracket here. And then again, I can just say continue. And now all of this code can come out by one level, and I get rid of that closing bracket. And because these are both conditions deciding whether I want to go through the rest of the loop, I'm just going to take out this gap between them. So these are the two conditions that must be met, or they must not be met to continue, or they must be met to go on. And then even here, if order open time is greater than check time, I'm going to do the same thing again. And I simply have to say if, just as I did before, if not order open time is greater than check time, continue. So now I'm testing each of these conditions. As soon as I get to one that fails, I'll go into the continue statement, which will go back to the beginning of the loop. And then all of this code is all that I'm executing, and it's only nested by the one level because it's inside this loop. And now to make this even more compact, I'm going to put one more function call in here, take all of this code and put it into its own function. So this apply stop loss function that I'll write in a moment will apply these stop loss points to the currently selected order. So now I've taken that code from here. It seems simple and not a lot of value, but really it makes this code so much shorter and easier to read. I now know I'm applying stop loss instead of having to read these lines of code in here to know what's happening. And the next thing I'm going to do, I've used this symbol info double, passing the order symbol and the argument symbol underscore point to get the size of a point for this symbol. This is an inbuilt function, but I just find that lengthy and more difficult to read. So I'm going to declare another function here. And this is a simple wrapper. I'm just going to call it symbol point. It takes the one argument, which is the symbol, and then it returns that symbol info double. So I'm wrapping all of this up, and now I can change this to a more readable symbol point, passing in the symbol. And now I'm going to change the way I've written this function, because this is a little bit lengthy. So all I'm saying here, if the order type is a cell, then I'm multiplying stop loss by -1. So stop loss is calculated here. And if it's a cell, then I'm just reversing that. Stop loss by -1. And then I can replace all of this with this. Stop loss price is now just order open price plus the stop loss. I don't need to worry about plus in one case and minus in the other, because stop loss will be negative if it's a cell. Maybe take that code out, and that takes care of the stop loss price calculation. Much easier to read. So then I'm applying this normalized double, and here again I have this lengthy symbol info integer, which I'm also casting to an int, because although this is called symbol info integer, it returns a long. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did with symbol point. And now I've created a function called symbol digits. It's an integer type. It still takes the symbol argument. I've got the casting inside the function here, so I'm always going to be returning an integer. This code is exactly the same as the code here, so now I can replace this symbol info integer with symbol digit. And again, I find that much easier to read than the lengthy statement here. Now, if you're looking at this for MetaTrader 5, most of this can be applied directly. So the continue statement is in MetaTrader 4 and 5. You can use this same technique to reduce the indentation. I still recommend calling a function inside these event handlers rather than put code inside the event handler. I still recommend taking constants and making them inputs or constant declarations in your code. In fact, everything done here is the same. Obviously, these order modifier, this was written for MetaTrader 4. You'll be using positions rather than orders. But the symbol digits and symbol point are the same code for MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5. So that will simplify your code, make it easier to read. So now if we look at ATR trailing stop, this actually is going to be different between MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5, and I'll point out the differences as we go. Nothing in the beginning of the code here. This is already quite good. This section could be moved out to a separate function, but I just find that it's not worth the trouble when I'm declaring a static variable for stop loss to call another function that then has the static variable in. I found this was acceptable to leave this here. But if you want to, you can take all of this out and simply make a call to the stop loss function, and it will determine whether to return the existing value or to do the calculation again. You can tidy up the new bar function. This is the same between MetaTrader 4 and 5. So I still have a previous time of 0. I'm setting this to 0 because that's just the beginning. The first time through, this will trigger a new bar. I'm still picking up a date time of now based on time, symbol, and period. But then instead of this piece of code where I'm testing a condition and then assigning values and returning true if the condition is true, I'm going to replace that with this line. I'm doing the same test comparing previous time to now, but instead of having a not equal, I now have an equal. So I'm basically saying if it's the same time, then we don't have a new bar and I'm just returning false. So I'm getting out of the code early. And then I can simply fall through to the rest of this code, because if I haven't already returned here, then I'm going to go through, reset the previous time to be now and return true because I do have a new bar. So it's just a bit of a simplification there. By exiting early, takes out a level of indentation here and just makes the code a little bit easier to read. I don't have any updates on the ATR stop loss. This function's clean. In the apply trailing stop, I'm also going to replace this with symbol digits. Same function that I created in the auto stop loss. So let me copy those functions in. So now this digits is a little easier to read because I'm getting symbol digits, symbol. In the same way, I'm going to replace this symbol info double to get the bid and the ask with symbol bid and symbol ask. So the symbol ask and symbol bid, exactly the same function calls, symbol ask bid. And now this is also much easier to read. And now in this loop for the apply trailing stop, I'll apply the same techniques that I applied in the auto stop loss for simplifying the loop. So first I take these conditions and replace them with reverse conditions and then continue. Now I could try simplifying this, but I think this is as close as it's going to get and still be reasonable to read. Checking the order type and then simply applying the order modify. And down in create trades, Similar simplification. I'll just insert the whole block here so that you can see them. I still have the for loop for I equals count minus 1. I've taken out the usual if order select and then nesting, and I've replaced that with if not order select continue. The order if order symbol equals and order magic number, I've wrapped all of that with a not symbol and replaced that with a continue, just to simplify this block. And the rest of that doesn't change, so let me just make sure that compiles. Now look at the MetaTrader 5 version of this. There are a couple of extra changes there that I want to show you. Now firstly, in MetaTrader 5 I've already included this trade.mqh file, and I'm declaring a variable called trade that is of type C trade. This MQH file will also include some other header files that are supplied by MetaTrader, and one of those is C position info. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm declaring a variable called position that is of type C position info, and that gives me access to some functions that just help with handling positions. Then most of this code is the same. I'll replace this new bar with the updated code from MetaTrader 4, and as I said, this all still works. No changes in the ATR stop loss here. And then we get down to apply trailing stop. The changes here are very similar. I'll replace these 3 lines. Here I'm using my symbol digits function and the symbol bid and ask. I'll add these in later. I'm still using positions total. But now the first change, I'm getting the ticket back by using that position variable that I created earlier. So this is a position object, and it has a method called select by index, which does the same thing as position get ticket. It's just a little bit easier to read. And it still returns the ticket number and loads that position into memory. So I'm going to use that instead of the position get ticket. That's a very minor change. As with MetaTrader 4, I don't want to create a level of nesting here. So instead I'm going to say if ticket is less than or equal to 0, continue. So instead of ticket greater than 0. And the next line is going to do something similar, but also instead of this position get string and passing in position symbol, there is another function inside the position object that I can use. So the position object has a method called symbol, which is a little bit easier, I think, to read than position get string. And it also has position.magic, which replaces this statement. So I can replace this line and another level of embedding by these and simplify these 2 function calls. Let me just remove the indenting on these lines. And now to make this a little simpler again, position get integer position underscore type, I can again use this position object with a call to position.type. I can replace position get double for position price open with position.price open, and I can replace this position get double position SL with position stop loss. And then here in trade.position modifier, I can also replace this position get double position TP with position.take profit, and I can do the same down here on the sell side. So this position is quite useful, and it keeps track of the currently open position or the currently selected position. There is in the same group of include files a symbol info class, but I don't find a lot of value in that. You can use it if you like. It isn't, as far as I know, pulled in just by including trade.mqh. You'll have to include trade/symbolinfo.mqh, and then you get access to a C symbol info class. But I just find that to be a little less useful, and it's much easier for me to just create these functions. So I'll just put my little group of functions in here, make sure this compiles, and it does. So those are a few techniques to just make your code a little bit more readable. And in summary, keep the code in the event handlers short, call functions to do the other work, pass in all the values you need to those functions. Don't rely on global variables. Consider using continue statements to jump through your loops rather than levels of nesting. Use this position object if you're using MetaTrader 5 rather than the lengthy functions for position get integer and position get string. And even on MetaTrader 4, simplify things like symbol get info and write your own wrapper functions like these. So as I said, just a short video today, just on some techniques. These don't change the way the code works. They don't really have any impact on performance, but they may help you to maintain your code either as you're developing it and going through debugging, or later when you've built it and you might want to make some modifications. If you found this to be useful, click the like button, and if you want to see more of our videos, click subscribe, and then if you click the bell icon, you'll be notified when we release the next video. So until next time, thank you for watching.